You are now watching ZACIAN PTCG. Let's get it! Yo, what's poppin' YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be covering over another top 10 decks in our format. So another week has gone by and I'm covering over the top 10 decks. Yep, these are my top 10 personal deck lists or deck lists taken by some of the top performers in the game, tournament proven. So if you're looking to kind of like understand where the metagame is this week or where it's heading, this is the video that you want to watch. If you haven't already, give this video a like. It does help boost it to other Pokemon fans. Subscribe to the channel. We're so close to 4,000 subs. Let's get there. And check the pinned comment for all the deck lists below. So if you want to follow along this video or playtest any of these decks, all of the deck lists are right there just for you to copy and paste. That being said, we've had a lot of changes going on in our top 10 decks. We added a new deck this week based off a lot of strong performances throughout the week. So I'm excited to show exactly where that goes today. So let's see what's going on in our top 10. Jumping into our number 10 spot, we have the control deck that Vini Fernandez has been playing for a while now. So after he was able to come first at both the Chill TCG Invitational and the Corolo Invitational, this deck kind of picked up a bit of popularity. It's not necessarily getting all those top placements, but it is getting played enough at some of the bigger events because it does have a decent spread against the metagame. There are inconsistency issues in a best of one format, but in a best 2 out of 3 format, this deck is a little bit better than most people know. So I think this deck, if anything, is probably going to stay within the lower top 10 heading into this week. If anything, dipping out of the top 10. It was very close to not making this list. Mad Party is the solid 11th deck, and it was only like one placement, a top 8 at a smaller event that really boosted this deck a little bit more. Now, one thing that I do want to note, I also included all of the control archetypes as the 10th spot. So this control deck could be a different form. Maybe it'd be like the Altaria Munchlax control version. So depending on how the metagame forms, this is just more of a control placeholder, with this being the most successful out of all of them so far. That being said, let's jump into our number 9 spot. Galaxy Mewtwo is a previous top 5 deck in our format, and it seems like it's just not necessarily keeping up with how the metagame is shaping. We've seen other versions of this deck such as Mewtwo, Mew, URSHIFU VMAX, and that deck also seems to be losing popularity as well. The reason why this deck is dropping is likely because players are flocking to new decks such as Victini, or as other decks seem to be more successful, they seem to be jumping onto those decks in general. So my whole thought process is this deck's probably going to stay within the top 10. I think it's anywhere between the lower half of the top 10, so 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, depending on how its matchup spread changes in the next couple weeks. And I know that's a bit of a vague answer, but let me clear that up a little bit. This deck is probably going to be heavily connected to if LUCMETAL can somehow survive the Victini matchup, if Victini has a good matchup or a poor matchup against this deck. I think right now we're in a week of discovery, so we might see decks get all jumbled up heading into next week. If anything, I just feel like this deck's probably going to be a little bit lower on the tier list. Right now, it is a very strong deck, but it's a little bit low right now. So jumping into our number 8 spot, we have TEMPOZARD. TEMPOZARD's been all over our whole top 10 decks, and I think it's one of those things where this is a welder-based deck. Victini RAPIDASH came out this week. A lot of people are experimenting with that. That deck's had a lot of really great performances. That means that this deck's probably not going to get as much love as the other welder decks. This deck is likely more successful overall. I mean, not likely, it is more successful overall. So only time will tell if this is the better welder deck. Now, I think this deck is much better in 2 out of 3, whereas Victini's likely a better deck in best of 1. And the only reason why I'm saying likely is because I don't necessarily want to get caught up into a current metagame trend. If you asked me a week ago if Mewtwo URSHIFU would have made the top 10 list, I would have been like, yeah, you want to know what, that makes a lot of sense. But then to have another new deck make the top 10 list, which is Victini, we'll see it up there soon. And I mean, we'll see exactly what that list looks like. It's one of those things where other welder decks or similar decks are, of course, going to be going down a little bit. This deck, again, is still very powerful, so there's nothing necessarily wrong with it. I think it's one of those things, if you know how to sequence your deck well, this is the deck for you. ADP ZACIAN jumping from number 1 all the way down to number 7 is one of the steepest drops we've ever seen in these power rankings that I do week by week. And the only explanation that I have is that players are experimenting with other decks at this time. So based off we go last week, we had the Mewtwo URSHIFU deck that kind of popped off, And I mean, people had to experiment it. So if you're an ADP player, maybe you're looking for that next best deck, or maybe you're just playing ADP to tide you over until the metagame kind of shapes up. This week, especially with Victini, you have 2 new decks to play with. So this is just like old news, an old toy, getting forgotten about. It's one of those things. This deck's of course going to jump back up as the metagame shapes up. However, it's really going to come down to the terms of what is Victini's matchup spread once a lot of the top players start experimenting with it. I mean, it was only last week that I was able to cover the deck list. It's one of those things where like not enough information is known in general. Even if you ask me right now, give me exactly Victini's matchup spreads within 10%, I don't think I could accurately do that this time. So as we continue to experiment with what's going on with these newer concept decks, it's one of those things where we still need to figure it out. And Galarian Rapidash is really the reason why Victini is doing so well, of course. That's a whole card on its own. I could think of other ideas such as Galarian Rapidash or Beetle, or Galarian Rapidash, Rapid Strike Urshifu that no one's necessarily really tried out, maybe beyond like a meme video, but there's a lot of stones to be uncovered right now. So that being said, I think with ADP going a little bit down and E-Turn going a little bit up, I've gone up with the Mawiles, and I figured that Crushing Hammer isn't as necessary for this particular version of the deck. One of the more interesting inclusions on this list is Grass Mewtwo. Now, Grass Mewtwo's been on this list for I think like 3-4 weeks now, usually lower on the list, bottom 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So the fact that it shot up from number 9 to number 6 is not all that surprising, although it makes me wonder, due to my lack of experience with this deck as a whole, I mean, not to say that I'm inexperienced with it, I just don't know every single matchup in and out. It surprises me on a week where Victini's Rapidash is having such a tear that this deck continuously thrives. Maybe you could just go Mewtwo Mew GX strategy, or maybe the big charms really screw up the numbers. So I think it's one of those things where this deck might actually go down a little bit, depending on how its Victini matchup is. I think that Victini needs to play the Tool Jammer card or Tool Scrapper just to get rid of things like Big Charm. So it is one of those things that I'm trying to track week over week. So I wouldn't be surprised if this deck made top 10 again. Nothing really new in this deck or anything like that, but I just feel like in a fire type metagame, you might run into more issues than you'd probably like to see. Jumping in at the halfway mark, we got Rapid Strike Urshifu. It's dropped a couple spots from its number 3 to number 5, and that's likely due to increased competition from other decks. Victini is one of those decks where it does well against VMAX decks, V decks, so I could see that it could be difficult, and even as recently as the Sunday Open, Koichi Kimura did add a Mew into the deck, just kind of nailing the coffin shut on Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX, so you can't necessarily spread the damage to the other Pokemon, really turning your deck into you doing 150 and Victini doing 220. Numbers tell me that that's probably going to be more successful for Victini off the top of my head. Now, one thing to note, this deck's probably going to be tied to ETERNATUS, PIKAROM, things like that are favorable matchups. With both of those decks not being seen on this list, they're definitely above, so this deck does have good matchups in the current formats. I'd say anything, it's going to stick around the top 5 this week, but not too much else movement's going to be happening around it. Jumping into our number 4 spot, we have LUCMETAL. LUCMETAL's a deck that allowed me to place second, third place tie in North America for the Players' Cup 4 qualifiers. So I mean, I got 150 rep with this deck. It's one of those things where I feel like I know this deck inside and out right now, and I think it's better to be playing Stealthy Hood, Coating Metal Energy, and Chaotic Swell, just because fire is way up, hitting those stonks. So if you want to necessarily have a chance against those matchups, and again, these are things where I feel like the matchup was like, it was unfavorable. I don't want to be like it was like slightly unfavorable or it's very unfavorable. I'd say it's just like unfavorable, nothing crazy. But Stealthy Hood, the extra Coating Metal Energy, and Chaotic Swell are the cards that I'd add in if I were playing LUCMETAL. I honestly don't know if I have it in me to play LUCMETAL this week, because again, the fact that we're talking about a brand new deck, Victini Rapidash, we haven't seen it yet, it's going to be top 3 minimum. It's one of those things where the deck is probably going to see a lot more play the next week as well. So that being said, like maybe this deck is fine because the decks that try to counter Victini, such as Inteleon VMAX, might get countered by LUCMETAL, but we'll have to see how this week really goes. I'd say that this deck is, if anything, could go down a little bit depending on the counters for Victini that come out. So jumping into our number 3 spot, we have PIKAROM. PIKAROM is one of those decks that seems to do well whenever the metagame gets really jumbled up, and I think it's getting really jumbled up with all of this Victini and other decks moving up and down. PIKAROM can kind of weather the storm if that's what we want to go about. The only changes that I've really made to this list is I cut a Stealthy Hood because we're seeing less Rapid Strike URSHIFU, and we're seeing more things such as Galarian Rapidash in decks in general. So Big Charm's better than Stealthy Hood right now. That's something that could definitely change, but PIKAROM as a core is looking very similar across the board. We're adding a Boltund, taking out a Boltund. We're adding in a... You know what I'm saying? It's one of those things. Take Team Yellground out of the deck, add in Fan of Waves. The deck really has its similar core, and nothing's changing too much. This deck's seen a lot of success. I think it's continue to see success, and the better the players playing this deck, the better the results are. So it's one of those things where PIKAROM for an average player, or for a player that's just playing it because they know what they're doing with PIKAROM's always going to get those top 32, top 16 placements, top 8 at the smaller events. When you're playing PIKAROM as a top player in the game, the Gabriel Smarts, the Mike Fouchés, Vitor Lugon, it's one of those things where PIKAROM's hitting those strides and getting those really big performances. So I think there's also a correlation between the skill of player and PIKAROM's success. So the more skillful the player is, of course PIKAROM's going to do better, but PIKAROM is really more of a skill-based deck than many people consider it. So I think the more skilled players that play this deck, of course it's going to get those big performances and pop off all the way to the top. So I think if anything, PIKAROM's going to be going up a little bit. It dropped 1 spot, but that's basically because we entered a new deck into the format that we haven't seen yet. So jumping into our number 2 spot, we got Eternatus VMAX. Eternatus VMAX, similar to PIKAROM, is more of a neutral deck, so it can kind of weather the storm while adjusting the matchup spreads. Now, one thing that we can note about this deck is that Galarian Zigzagoon went up this week, and I've also added Scoop Up Nets to give yourself a better chance about beating the Victini deck. Now, you could do the whole Dread Ends plus 4 Galarian Zigzagoons to get a knockout on the Victini VMAX. That can really add up a lot, especially if you're able to get 1 OHKO per game. They can't OHKO you, you can OHKO them. They don't play Crushing Hammers, you don't play Crushing Hammers. So what it tells me is, if you get 1 OHKO on a Victini VMAX in a game, or if you just clearly get a better start, you're likely just winning the game. I also cut the Phoebe version down, so I used to play 2 copies in this list. I cut the Phoebes and the Tool Scrappers just because those are trending lower, as LUCMETAL looks like it might tank this upcoming week. So Eternatus VMAX, looking like it's going to continuously do well. Maybe this will be one of the decks to beat going into next week. I don't know if it's going to be able to dethrone Victini. Surprise, surprise, we'll see what her number 1 spot is. Gigantic wink, but I mean, it looks really good right now. So jumping into our number 1 spot, we have the deck that Koichi Kimura was able to win Chill with, come second at the Sunday Open, and earlier the week they've played in a lot of smaller events and seen success with this deck. This deck exploded onto the scene and skyrocketed all the way to number 1. The way that I score everything, I'll put it in perspective. ADP was 400-ish points last week. Victini hit 560 points. A lot of people are playing this deck. So I took this version of the deck, made a couple changes by adding in Tool Jammer, a Fire Crystal. I took Koichi Kimura's kind of take with the Mew to improve the Rapid Strike URSHIFU matchup, and I think that this deck is a real contender. I wouldn't be surprised if this deck continued to just soar and see success. We might have some counters that come out for it. We might see some water type decks, maybe Lapras, maybe Inteleon VMAX, and that might bring LUCMETAL. But water type counters, of course, are going to be great because it also brings in other free matchups for your deck, such as LUCMETAL. So as decks try to counter other decks, Victini might be well positioned for the next upcoming few weeks. We've seen how Sendascorch was able to ride the top in the last formats, and how TEMPOZARD has come close to the top. I think this is going to definitely be a top 5 deck in the upcoming week, but again, only time will tell, depending on what. Maybe we'll see another new deck. Really, the thing that allowed this deck to see its top 1 spot is Galarian Rapidash V. So not even a new set was released, just a single promo card. So remember to check your promos, remember to check your local game stores if it's safe, and if you're looking for any online codes, check out the code resellers as well. So it's one of those things where Galarian Rapidash V really changing up the meta, and if you don't have them now, I recommend getting them because they look like they're only going to go up. And that's what we got going on for this video this week, peeps. So top 10 list, I mean, it's crazy comparative to last week, especially with Victini soaring all the way to the top. We'll have to see how everything goes. I tried to give a little bit of insight for each deck, why some of the decks were played, where some of the decks are going, where they're heading, where they've been, where they've gone, blah, 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 blah. If you want to know more about these decks, I also included the links to my videos, my personal videos, so you can learn exactly what's going on with those decks in the deck list below. So we'll show you to learn more, click there and you can learn a little bit more. Sure, it might not be the exact same deck list, but the concepts are very similar, and you'll be able to see exactly these decks in action, or similar decks in action, just so you can learn more about our current metagame. Again, if you haven't already given this video a thumbs up, seriously do it. It helps with the algorithm. I can't say it enough. It's one of those things that would really help out my channel a lot. And if you like watching the videos, that's one of the freest ways to help me out. Subscribing to the channel is the next best way because it does help spread the word. And we do have our goal of 4,000 as we shoot for the moon. Thank you so much everyone for watching. Have yourself a wonderful week and best of luck in your next Pokemon TCG game. Peace out. I want to give a huge shout out to everyone who's become a channel member so far. Some peeps love watching my videos, and I totally appreciate that, but some peeps have gone more than out of their way beyond just watching my videos and have supported me financially. So shout out to everyone who's been featured on this channel, who's going through this list of names. We actually have so many channel members that I can't fit them in a single slide, so I figured this might be the best way to get everyone appreciated and kind of showcase all of the top supporters of the ZACIAN PTCG YouTube channel. Seriously, it means I mean it from the bottom of my heart. It's honestly, I'm almost at a loss for words, but I'm so happy that you are all appreciating and loving the content and that it's hitting home. And I mean, I'm up all in my feels, so I hope that you understand. And thank you so much, everyone. If you want to become a channel member, totally consider it. I'll make it worth your while. And I totally mean that. I'll do everything I possibly can for my channel members to make it sure that it's worth their while. So thank you so much, everyone, and it's just amazing. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. If you haven't already, it'd mean the world to me if you could subscribe to help support me as a content creator. Thanks again, and have yourself a great one.